Hello and welcome to Moving Forward, a podcast by GoodHabitz. I'm your host, Remy Reurling. In this podcast, we make sure you get all the insights you need to build a high-performing learning culture to future-proof your organization. Whether you're an HR professional, a learning and development manager, or anyone looking to give your team a leg up, you'll learn the trends and tricks to get your people learning and moving forward. In each episode, we invite an expert to unpack some key statements designed to get them sharing their best insights. Today, we're zooming in on skills gaps. What are they? And how do you identify them? And most of all, how do you tackle them? To help unpack this, I'd like to welcome David James. Thank you for joining our remote podcast, actually, David.
Thanks, Remy. It's a pleasure.
I'll just introduce you for a second. You've been the head of L&D at the Walt Disney Company. You're the host of the Learning and Development podcast, and you're also the CLO of 360 Learning. So there's a lot of skills actually in you when you are actually that much of an L&D head, let's say. So what is your particular interest in skills in this?
The thing is, Remy, it's a topic that's been front of mind for learning and development for many years. The focus on skills is nothing new for us. In fact, it has been said that it's always been our job. But I think that the growing prominence of this is with the emergence of skills gaps. And that's not a message that's coming from learning and development. That's a message that is being heard loud and clear by CEOs, business leaders. It's in the national press. It's affecting not just organizations and industries, but entire economies are currently in flux due to a shortage of skills. It's been said that if we close the skills gap by 2030, then we could release another $6.5 trillion into the economy as a result of that. But you've got to look at the other side. We're 5 years off of 2030, and if we don't plug those skills gaps, then that's an enormous amount of opportunity that's been missed.
Right, it's a real challenge that we have to solve. But it's also interesting because skills aren't really taught at schools or universities, right? They're just skilled at, or they are learned at your job, at your place of employment. So you're actually starting with like a leg down instead of a leg up. So we're learning about skills gaps now, and you've recently released the Learning Report of 2024 with 360 Learning. So to move us in there a little bit, what were the main findings there?
Well, there's good news in the report, Remy, and there's work to be done. We commissioned the report because for a long time, you mentioned my long career in learning and development. I joined learning and development in the late 1990s when it was said that e-learning was going to replace the classroom. And of course, it didn't happen. And a decade later, not only was e-learning not going to replace the classroom, it was a huge task to get people to use it. I remember leaving Disney in frustration in 2014 because there's no way that I could fulfill my remit by doing everything manually or everything face-to-face, but I was hamstrung by the usual learning platform filled full of content. So I left there thinking we have to solve the digital learning problem because we're stuck otherwise. So I wanted to ask the tough questions. As of today, what do people actually think of this? And not learning and development, but our employees at large. What do they truly think about online learning? And do they think it actually helps them to do their job? Now, the good news is they do. That people not just expect online learning now, but they respect it. And they truly believe that when it comes to enhancing the performance of their work and also in addressing their own development of skills, they believe that it works for them. So that is a huge boon. And I think that that's work that's been done in our profession over the last 5 to 10 years. I think there have been some cultural elements to that as well. I think that COVID, remote working, and the expectation that we work digitally more often has had a huge factor in that. But I also think the maturity of online learning in general has helped. But when you take a look at the other side of that and where work needs to be done, is that people underappreciate, and quite rightly, the top-down generic off-the-shelf content, because it doesn't help them to draw a line between what they're consuming and the actual work that they do. And then we're left with the results that I'd stated before, where business leaders, the national press, and commentators on the world of work recognize there are skills gaps, and whatever we're doing right now isn't closing those.
Right, exactly. So there is a lot of learning being done, but if it's not in those skills you actually need for your job, then there is a skill gap that's being created. Okay, so we are going to go through 4 statements, and I'd like to start with the first one. I'll just read it up for you, and we'll discuss them, we'll debate them. Maybe we agree. I think we'll agree. But let's go into the first one. This is statement number 1. Skills are the currency in today's professional landscape. So this is about the importance of skill development, right? And you've touched upon this for a little bit, in that there are skills, but we don't really know what they are or what we need for those jobs. So we're naming this a currency in the statement. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that skills are a huge part of it. We can't overlook experience, and I'm not sure that experience would be overlooked by employers and hiring managers anytime soon. But there is so much currency in skills at the moment because the skills are changing so quickly. We've talked about the half-life of skills, which seems to be reducing and reducing. Plus, you've got emerging skills which have come about due to not just changing consumer demands, but also advances in technology. We've got older generations leaving the workforce, and also younger generations expected to spend less time at organizations. You've got this perfect storm. So organizations recognize when their skills are deficient inside their organization. And in learning and development, where I do believe that skills is our currency, it's not the provision of learning, it's not the successful consumption of learning and learning experiences, and it's not the measurement of learning. It is the development and the measurement of skills, which will be our lifeblood. Because the way that I look at it is that if we don't take this opportunity, then somebody else will. And so you've got a learning and development profession which has struggled for decades to be able to measure its efficacy. And organizations and business leaders, especially at the C-suite, recognize that it is so important. So going to answer your question directly, it is a currency, but I think that the stakes are higher for learning and development than they are elsewhere, because organizations will beat this. This will be beaten, and it has to. But whether learning and development have a seat at the table and are influencing it, that's up to us.
Yes, exactly. Would you say that, because in your answer, you've said a little bit about the older generation moving out and the newer generation moving in, that skills have become more of a currency since these new generations?
Yeah, I think so. What I love about that is that it doesn't seem that long ago since I was in organizations, and my role at Disney and other places, I was privy to some significant conversations. You see, I'm choosing my words.
That's a
I'm
euphemism.
I'm a diplomat if I'm nothing else. But I've been in those conversations where it's been exclaimed that we've got the wrong people. Now, of course, when you've got the wrong people, that becomes an expensive problem, especially when you're in HR, as I have been for a majority of my career. Because if you've got the wrong people, you need to change the people. But what I love about skills is it's not the acknowledgement that you have the wrong people. You may have the right people. You have the wrong skills. And skills are fixable with what you have. And I think we have to look at this. Also, that allows us to accept that we've not wholesale made mistakes across our workforce. Perhaps we have always had the right people, but the way in which jobs are scoped, including using skills rather than necessarily just tasks and roles, but also the way that we choose to develop people in terms of growing their skills, not necessarily just say behaviors or perhaps the worst crimes in learning and development, by addressing topics, then I think we've got a greater chance, first of all, to recognize that we have influence, but then to impose that influence and truly close skills gaps.
Right. So closing those skills gaps, it's always just part of the discourse, right? And it's becoming more and more part of the discourse. Closing skill gaps. Now we have a distinction between soft skills and hard skills. I don't know. Do you adhere to that distinction actually?
My great friend in the profession, Guy Wallace, who I've had the privilege of working with a great deal, he uses this phrase that soft skills are just hard skills out of context. And I do agree. When it comes to the nuts and bolts of doing a job, then if you're the one actually doing the job, you can recognize that in any given context, those soft skills that are hard to define elsewhere are actually hard skills. Those are that if you don't remove them from the context in which they are to be employed, then they can be defined, scoped, and addressed. But of course, the market of learning and development is in the business much more of very small learning and development teams and perhaps an army of partners that aren't part of your organization, trying to service an enormous disparate workforce. Now, the way that has worked for decades now is in the collection and the aggregation of learning needs. So we're not talking about work anymore. We're talking about learning needs. These are categorized in topics, communication skills, presentation, for the benefit of categorization and dissemination. And then there are standardized solutions brought down for which vast numbers of people attend courses. I run many of these myself. And when you're going around the room and asking people, why are you here? There are always people who don't know because they're not having their actual needs addressed. These are assumed needs with standardized programs for people in multiple different roles. So there's a problem throughout learning and development in the way that we've overvalued topics and undervalued analysis, because if we've done the analysis, we will recognize that we understand the problems an enormous amount more. And that point of soft skills and hard skills, there would be far fewer soft skills, there would be far more hard skills, and we'd be able to develop and deploy solutions that were meant to influence people in the employment of those harder skills. Now, I do agree that there are softer skills and there are things that we can generally learn, but you've only got to look at how much money has been applied to management and leadership training over the years, and the question mark over whether any of that has delivered a demonstrable value to see that there is something broken in the way that we try to address learning needs without truly and completely understanding what it is that those skills or that development will lead to in terms of impact.
Right. I've taken to using them or naming them human skills instead of soft skills and hard skills. So let's talk about skills, I'd say. So just to round off this statement then, we've talked about skills gaps and that they are a problem, but I do need to know how they are a problem, because we are just getting new employees based on their skills, right? On what they do. So there are skills gaps, but how are they a problem for organizations?
The problem for organizations in the roles that are not able to be filled. So at the moment, well, first of all, there is a very tight labour market. And so developing people from inside our organizations, preparing them for future roles, giving hiring managers a greater choice from inside our organizations is the biggest challenge pretty much facing organizations. I was speaking with a head of HR quite recently who said that they are over-reliant on external hires and it's caused an engagement problem inside their organization. But of course, something's disconnected there. It's broken. If your internal learning and development team or perhaps integrated HR team aren't preparing and growing people inside an organization, then there is an over-reliance. And so if you're not creating the supply inside your organization, then you're going to have a disgruntled workforce. So there's an engagement issue there. And we know that's a problem because learning and development find it very difficult to measure the impact, the ROI of the work done or the initiatives developed and then actual planned outcomes. So we can't take much credit as a profession for growing those skills. But also as a workforce, we're seeing the industrial skills councils and World Economic Forums talking about the deficiency in digital skills, in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. So we are seeing from an economies level that there's a lack of skills, and then of course it's individual organisations and our C-suites that feel that more critically. It was PricewaterhouseCooper who said that
PwC.
PwC, yeah, that said in a recent report that the untapped potential that we need upskilling to work for is worth $6.5 trillion, and that's no small amount. That's not coming from anywhere. With this it's going to be upskilling initiatives inside organisations, and perhaps it's going to be a role for universities as well to actually address these skills gaps, because capitalism's a beast. Capitalism will win, but there will also be victims along the way if these aren't addressed. Now, of course, if you believe in markets, then you believe that markets will find a way. But at the moment, the skills aren't being developed. And according to the Industrial Skills Council report that was published in 2019 about the skills strategy for 2030, within the problems I outlined, which was recognised that digital skills or digital capability was an issue, STEM was an issue, management and leadership was an issue. The fourth problem out of four that was recognised was teaching and training. It wasn't believed that the current level of skills and capability of teaching and training was going to address those skills gaps. So that's on us. Management and leadership, you could say, is on us as well. But our ability to actually close skills gaps was a fundamental risk to organisations and their ability to upskill. So there is a real pressing need. There's no fear mongering on here. These are messages we're hearing loud and clear from business leaders, and somebody's got to step up and close these gaps.
Right, and that is up to us. So it's a good thing that we're talking about this now, because we do need to zoom out a little bit, right? What you were talking about, $6 trillion, this is a whole economic effort we have to make up for. But this leads into the second statement I want to discuss with you, which is most organizations don't have a clear understanding of these skills. So this talks a little bit about where these skills gaps come from, just the lack of clear communication and understanding within companies themselves. Now, you have a big track record in the L&D business. Do you find a lot of companies that have this problem of not knowing what these skills gaps are?
So I think that there are two problems. Number one, I think it takes a really short-sighted organization to not know their skills gaps, but that's not the problem. It's learning and development don't know these skills gaps. So any workforce planning team or talent acquisition team are going to understand right now what the landscape is in terms of the skills that they don't have inside their organization that they need in the very near future. We don't need to be particularly too future focused. The world's changing too quickly for that. But talent acquisition teams or workforce planning teams will understand today what the skills are that are required in their organization. But learning and development is very rarely synced up to those departments, or they're not empowered to. In another report that my team commissioned last year on upskilling and reskilling, we recognised with another 2,500 respondents in learning and development that just over a quarter of those were involved in the upskilling, reskilling strategy in their organisation, which means that almost 3/4 of learning and development teams weren't across that. So I think that speaks to how little influence many of us do have when it comes to upskilling or reskilling. So I think that to summarize, I think that there is, you asked me whether organizations understand the skills. I think that understanding is likely to be in the skills. Whether it's a deep understanding is a different matter. But I think what's more problematic is not only the learning and development not know what the skills gaps are, there isn't a learning infrastructure and provision in order to directly address that and then start to address those skills gaps.
Right. Yeah. So L&D has a big part in this. But that also means that if you have L&D groups, departments that do need to fill these skill gaps, but they don't know what they are, they just offer learning stuff. At least that is from my understanding, from what I've seen, that you have L&D who have the assignment of teach people stuff. And then they do this assignment, they teach people stuff, but that is where your solution-based problem comes from, of just teaching topics, teaching learning instead of skills gaps. So what is a concrete thing that the L&D department can do to finally reach that understanding?
It's the principle of skills mapping. That's what needs to be done. If it's a sad state of affairs that if you don't know what the problem is, then everything looks like a solution,
right?
But rarely is. So what we need to do as learning and development is get to a state of truly understanding what those skills are in the context of any given. We're not just talking inside our organization or department. We should be looking at actual roles in parts of our organization, so that we've mapped what these skills are. People can assess themselves and have managers and peers assess their capability based on what other people see and experience of their work, not just to understand the skills, but also the level of proficiency that they have, so that they can see how they need to grow, again, in the very specific context of their utilization of those skills, and then have very targeted development solutions in order to increase their proficiency and prepare them for future roles. Now, that would have sounded an absolute nightmare piece of work to do not that long ago. It could take 3 to 5 years to map an entire organization. And the problem is, we've already mentioned the half-life of skills, is that many of those skills can be out of date by the time you've completed the skills map across your organization, which was a reason why many organizations never even started that work. But the world's changed. And not only are we able to do this much, much quicker now, it's almost as if there's no excuse. We can, but also, as people aren't dodging the responsibility here. But you don't need to skills map your entire organization in one go now. What we're able to do is skills map priority parts of our organization, and then just do this upskilling work as and when it's required, rather than thinking that it is always a company-wide initiative, because it's generally not.
No, yeah, it is always good advice to just pick things apart and do it one by one, right? But your advice then is to L&D departments to really map out everything you would need to know in terms of skills. Which jobs are there? What kind of vocations maybe? And then also what skills do they need to succeed at their jobs? But the thing is, if it's such a big task and if it's done by so many departments already, isn't this then just a problem of the learner? Shouldn't they just know what sort of skills they need?
So I don't think so, Remy. It's a good challenge, because we are there already. So where we are right now is learning and development providing an enormous library and curriculum, and it's left to the individual to source it themselves. But the problem is that if you don't understand what the problem is, then you don't understand what the solution could be. And that's from a learning and development perspective. And that's why everything looks like a solution when you don't know the problem. So learning and development by huge, great big libraries of content, based on the premise that if we have, say, for example, 100,000 people in our organization and our LMS has 10 million pieces of content, then there must be something for everybody, right? But the problem is it speaks to no one's job. It speaks to absolutely no one's job. It's simply the exchange of ideas. Some might be relevant, some might not, but come again next week, because the ones that weren't relevant then might be relevant now. It's a nonsense. It's a complete nonsense. But we've got where we are by assuming that all we needed to do was have enough content and a motivated, self-directed learner. But what we're finding out with skills mapping is that when you skills map down to task level, which can be done very easily these days, then you're able to see that there's no way that everybody will know. You only understand your job from the proficiency level that you are at today. So say, for example, you're one step from novice, one step in advance of novice, and you're asked, what else do you need to know? How do you know? You don't have the experience.
You're at that level.
Yeah, exactly. You know that level. So if you're expected people not even just to have the requisite level of performance to be okay at your job, then that's all you'll know. But mastery is going to be well beyond your realm. Sometimes looking at somebody who can master their role, they look like they're making shortcuts, but they're not. They're using all of their experience in order to make things look a whole lot easier than they would be. So the answer is actually the opposite of your challenge there, Remy, which is we can't rely on the goodwill and intention of a motivated, self-directed learner. We as learning and development need to provide them with guidance and support to show them the way, but also provide them the guidance and support in resources and courses that's going to help to not just grow their knowledge, not just grow their know-how, but also provide them with the insights they need to help them to greater problem solve and make decisions.
Right. So that means that it is up to the L&D department to really get in there and prime those skills, look at what these skills are, look at the jobs and everything within that. But leading into statement number 3, I'll just read it because that is actually what I wanted to say. Statement number 3, solving those skills gaps is a Herculean task. So it's massive. And where do people start with this? I'm just, my mind is boggled thinking about it.
So you go where the biggest problem is. So that's the thing. Right. So going back to what I mentioned before, we did a work at Disney on job families, and it took years. And that was starting with a blank piece of paper. I was involved one step removed. It was one of my colleagues in HR that ran the exercise. But I saw how Herculean it was. You start with a blank piece of paper. You workshop until you understand not just roles but also distinctions between those roles, to levels of specificity that are possible, again, across job families. And then you print it off. And by the time you have, it's likely to be out of date because it can take 2 to 3 years. And you can't keep on doing that job. I mean, it takes an enormous amount of endeavor to do so. But what you're able to do now is with simple AI tools that are freely available, you can map skills in your organization down to about 90%. So by using ChatGPT or tools like Skills GPT on the ChatGPT store, you can type in your organization's name. It can list what are likely to be the departments. Within the departments, the roles. Within the roles, the skills. Prioritize the criticality of those skills, and then get down into the details of the proficiency level of those skills. Now, those aren't going to be 100%, but those could be as close to 90% accurate. And so instead of going into a brainstorming meeting with a blank piece of paper, you're in there talking about the functional expertise required in order to deliver on those skills in any given organization. And that is an enormous step forward. So those conversations with stakeholders, both with senior leaders, with team managers, and those employed to execute those skills and deliver results, those are just looking and understanding the nuance within any particular skill sets, confirming the criticality, and also those proficiency levels. Because once you've got those, and then what you're able to do is once you've got the agreement, feed that into a skills assessment tool that, again, could be assessed by the individual, their manager, and as many peers as is required. So all of a sudden, in just a matter of hours, you can have the skills mapped, the assessments created, and then the gaps identified. How more empowered is a learning and development professional, as well as an individual, once they know what those actual skills gaps are? Because if we do understand what those skills gaps are, we certainly won't be buying huge rafts of generic content thinking that there must be something there. You're looking at the shortest distance between where they are and where they need to be, and then you're going to be creating smarter solutions. And then you're not going to be asking yourself whether they've been successful or not, because you will know on an individual level, on a team level, on an organization level, whether somebody is more capable, again, through rigorous skills assessments based on the perception of their peers, which I think is incredibly powerful, because after all, you've only got to convince the line managers that the individuals are now more capable and therefore delivering more work. And in terms of potential, you're only ever going to have to convince hiring managers that the talent pool that you're growing inside your organization has more potential than that outside of the organization. So there's an enormous amount of potential now that we have with the onset of AI that can take us from a standing start to actually understanding the problems in just a few hours.
So you have been talking about AI, right? Which is one of the solutions that we already have in statement 4. I'll just read it for a second. AI is a game changer in the skills gap process. Now, you've already said that this is true with tools like Skills GPT, but I do want to take things a little step back, because what you've said was, if people don't know where to start, it is a Herculean task. Just go through basically the easy line of L&D, right? Start with what is our biggest problem and work from there, just go in steps. And now AI is this game changer. Skills GPT already does a lot of this work for you, but what other sort of solutions do you see AI can bring to the table in the skills gap discussion?
There are many things that AI can do, and I think we'll leave right at the back of the queue creating solutions. The most important thing AI can do for learning and development is help to understand the problem. I think in connecting AI to business and people data inside organizations is going to help to highlight where the problems are in the first place. Knowing what to work on is as important as understanding the problem once we've lifted the lid. So if we can help to, I suppose, and the reason is that too many people have an opinion inside an organization about what a real problem is and why it's not, and there can be political advantages of people looking elsewhere. Again, I'm being diplomatic with my responses.
More euphemisms.
AI can help us. Yeah, that's right. AI can help us to point in the right direction and say, yes, this is a problem. It's a problem in performance. There's a problem with engagement. There's a problem with retention, and there is a problem with acquisition or finding the right talent or the right skills. When a flag is raised, then we can fully understand, we can get stakeholders on board to understand that this is where we should be applying our attention, because the cost of not is greater than the cost of applying a solution. So AI in help us to uncover where the priorities are, I think, is really important. It also helps learning and development if we're just getting started in developing skills or skills-based learning, because if we highlight one problem, then we recognize also that we don't need to do this across our entire organization. Everybody I've spoken to who's introduced a skills-based approach to learning and development has started on one thing. It was too important not to miss. So they fully understood it. They fell in love with the problem, which is a phrase that I use in the report. And once they understand the problem enough, then using skills mapping and understanding from subject matter experts what is actually required, then those problems can be solved. And it's as a result of doing this that learning and development build the confidence and the competence to continue. So the most important thing is that learning and development just get going. As I said, with AI, we can make that a lot easier. So highlighting a problem, we've talked about skills mapping, which is incredible. When you've completed a skills map, it's the same data, but in a different form that creates career paths. So we can truly activate the self-directed learner by saying to them, this is your path to proficiency, this is your path to mastery, but also for them to understand what the plausible routes are inside our organization. So based on their current skill set, what is it that they also need to develop in order to understand where else they could go inside the organization. Now, I think that is incredibly powerful. That is meeting the learner in their context, on their terms, to help them with what they are trying to do. So I think that's incredibly powerful. But then if we get to the content creation part, as in forming solutions, then again, I think there's real power. But I always say, if you start with the content creation path, it's easy to lose sight of what we're here to do, which is solve the known problems inside our organizations. The least we know, the less likely we are to hit the bullseye. But if we understand those skills gaps now, then we can create solutions. The power of this is in AI connecting with knowledge banks inside our organizations so that you're turning proprietary data or information into resources that can help to guide and support people to do better things in an organization. You've only got to think of chatbots that are trained on how to perform inside your organization, to exhibit the expected and rewarded behaviors for your context, for it to become incredibly powerful. And then creating courses is the last thing you'd do. You would create this guidance and support that pointed people in the right direction, that highlighted to them when they needed to exhibit a certain thing, or where perhaps they needed to show a different level of understanding, gain support for ideas, what it means to utilize their profile, or perhaps develop a profile in advance of needing to gain support for ideas. You just imagine that you've got a chatbot that surfaces this stuff that makes the tacit understanding of culture more explicit so that more people can be successful in our organizations. And so I see that it's far less around creating content than actually having an expert on your shoulder when you actually need to perform. And I think that is the most exciting part. There are many other things. We can create immersive learning experiences that mimic the real life, so that learners can really feel the experience, the learning experience, which apes the actual working environment. I think we're a little way off there now because anything that doesn't match the working environment, there's still too much of a disconnect. But at the pace of AI, you'd almost bet your money on by the end of the year there is something that mimics the actual working environment. So there is so much that we could do. But I think that my tip on all of this is, if you understand the work and what is unique about your organization's culture, then the chances of you hitting the bullseye are greatly increased. And that's why everything that I've explained so far helps learning and development to stay focused on that. Because were we to do this, then in the middle of next year, we'll be looking and thinking, right, how do we get closer to the bullseye rather than where's the board, which a lot of folks will be talking about now.
Right, exactly. And I think it's kind of funny, right, that the usage of AI actually boils down to the same principle of understand your problem and from there on out go to the solution. So what AI does is scalability, right? It makes it faster, it makes it easier. And if you look at the right parts of AI, so if you're looking at the big data part and you're putting that into an LLM, for instance, or large language model, that means that you're actually on the right track to actually identifying that skills gap within your organization just by identifying what your organization is actually in terms of data and in terms of the process of that. I love that sort of stuff. I just want to touch upon one little thing before we need to go to the end, because this has been a very fruitful discussion. And that is just going back to Skills GPT, right? Because this is something that you actually made, or I don't know if it was you personally, but your company, 360 Learning, it identifies the skills in your organization. So this is more of a front-loaded part of the usage of AI. Now, can just anyone use that?
The answer is yes, but I can't. I'll have to stop you. I can't take any credit for it. That's the very talented team at 360 Learning. But yes, if you've got a pro version of ChatGPT, then you're able to. But there's also a free version on Hugging Face that anyone can use. And I've spoken to folks on the Learning and Development podcast who've done so, who were agog with what it could actually do for them, and then the amount of time and effort that they've been able to save as a result of using Skills GPT. So it is freely available, and it's in my opinion, it's truly a game changer.
I feel the same way. I've used it and I also love it. And that's why I wanted to touch upon it a bit, plug it a bit, because this is just a great starting point for any organization trying to fill that skills gap or identify it at the very least. So, David, this has been a very fruitful discussion. Now, I want to ask you one thing and one thing only, and that is, what is your key takeaway from this whole discussion? What sort of tip do you have?
Well, the big thing for me is that skills-based learning is the way that we can address so many of the deficiencies in the learning and development profession, and then address what is one of the biggest priorities, not just for our organizations, but entire economies. So it's an opportunity that we've just got to take. It's so exciting, and I think that it's what we all should be doing.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way, because just identifying the skills gap and then going from the problem to the solution instead of jumping right away to the solution is just the thing that most people don't really think about, but is such an important part of looking for this L&D solution. So thank you for joining me, David. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Moving Forward. If you've learned something new here today, please share this episode with a colleague or a friend. And while you're at it, give us a review. This helps others to find our podcast, and it might help them move their people forward too. Thanks for joining. Until next time.